Welcome back, bookworms and listeners. We need to talk about Wind and Truth. It was released last Friday, December 6th, and this is going to be my spoiler-free review for it. If Griff wants to do his own, he might. I just felt like since I finished the book, I think people need to be prepared. I don't think I was. So let's get into it. The book picks up immediately after the events of Rhythm of War, with no time passing between the two except maybe a single period of night. After the prologue, which by itself raises more questions than it has answers, we start with day one with the exact same pair of POV characters as the first part of the Wave Kings, Kaladin and Shallan. If you've watched Sanderson's lectures on writing, you're not going to be surprised by what I'm about to say. Wind and Truth starts with a list of promises that grows almost exponentially throughout day one and day two. Then it progresses into progress for nearly every promise and ends with a payoff that I think is worthy of the first half of the Stormlight Archive. I expect, in hindsight, that we will suggest that Rhythm of War is simply the first half of a single book, which is ridiculous given that each Stormlight book is 2 to 3 books by itself. But in my opinion, any reread I do from here will not consider the ending of Rhythm of War to be a discrete ending of a book. Its ending will be the intermission for the final act of the first half of the Stormlight Archive. As I said, Wind and Truth is worthy of being the capstone to the first half of the Stormlight Archive. But you need to understand what Sanderson said. It is the end of an arc. It is not the end of a story. Just like any shonen anime, or really any anime is doing right now, if there's multiple seasons, the end of the season is not the end of the show, right? It doesn't answer all of the questions. Wind and Truth doesn't answer all of the questions. As I neared the end, I realized I was coming up to a cliff and was being hypnotized into hanging over it. I am not one to complain about a cliffhanger ending. I appreciate when there is ambiguity at the end of a story, and as a Cosmere content creator, I will say that the ending of this book leaves tens of videos worth of questions to explore. That being said, if you are someone who needs concrete answers at the end of the story, you may consider waiting until book 10. There's no good moment to stop reading the Stormlight Archive in books 4 or 5 that let you feel like everything is complete, except maybe after the second paragraph of the first chapter of book 5. The book does, however, offer concrete endings for several characters. It does a great job of helping us remember all the important details from books 1 through 4. Sanderson may seem to be doing a heavy-handed job of it at the start, but that's just because he knows exactly what he wants to do with this book, and he can't fiddle fart around getting there. He was working with a word limit cap, the largest that they'll print a single book at 491,000 words. Because of this, at times the characters may jump from one plot point to another in a non sequitur fashion. But to me, this can be forgiven, as the sum of the book is greater than that of its parts. I won't say that the book is perfect. It's not. There are physically a couple of typos that I noticed, which is fine. That's not anything that it actually detracts from it. There were also a couple of shoehorned jokes that appeal to some sensibilities, but not necessarily mine. And the pacing is, well, the book is not really a typical book. It's not even a typical Sanderson book. Yes, there are promises, progress, and payoffs. But it isn't like The Way of Kings or Words of Radiance, or Mistborn Era 1 or Era 2, where in each book you get a rather slow ride up the gentle hill that you then speed down on greased tracks. I think, if I were to describe it, I would tell you that this book is a Sanderlanche. The whole thing. There are revelations upon revelations, action upon action, parts where I screamed curse words out loud. I cried. I felt immense relief. It's like you're shot up a mountain taller than you've ever seen, and that moment of perfect stillness at the top as you crest the peak, the one where you are balanced against gravity and the world, lasts for about 1 second before you're holding on to the roller coaster's bar trying to hang on for your life. And then you stop suddenly and dangle over the edge of tracks that have been cut. This isn't a book. It's the moment that the green light shoots up from Cirith Ungol in The Return of the King, and somehow Rhythm of War is the deep breath before the plunge that Gandalf and Pippin were talking about. I would say that if you aren't up to date on your Stormlight reading and you feel that you might have a better grasp of what's going on if you went back and reread the first 4 books and 2 novellas, I'd say you're right. If you're confident in your knowledge and ability to recall events that took place, then, like I said before, Sanderson does do a good job of helping you remember. He calls back moments from each book and each novella. You can probably get away without rereading Edgedancer and Dawnshard, but I personally wish I had, just to eke out a little more from the story. I'll also say that if you go back and reread the Stormlight Archive and start forming theories about what's going to happen, you'll likely get a few right, as Sanderson, in hindsight, did a great job of foreshadowing the events of Wind and Truth, even from the start of The Way of Kings. Ultimately, Wind and Truth is a must-read for any fan of the Cosmere. Obviously, you shouldn't just pick it up and start reading it if you don't know what's going on with the rest of the Stormlight Archive. And it definitely helps if you're well versed with the rest of the Cosmere. Its events are going to play a major part in the coming stories, and I can't even describe to you what that looks like without sounding like I am a herald that's gone insane. It's not a perfect book, but I think it is a perfect cap to the first half of the Stormlight Archive. It's hard to see where Brandon Sanderson could have gone with the story to make it better. The prose is great for the story he's telling us. I think anything different and he wouldn't have gotten the same effect because his prose is really good at getting straight to the point, and this book needed everything to be straight to the point. And I also think the meat of the story is satisfying to sink your teeth into. There's a lot to chew on. I'm going to start my reread immediately so that I can catch all of the little Cosmere connections I may have missed. I want to emphasize something, though. Like Sanderson said, that this is the end of the arc. We haven't been waiting for Wind and Truth since Rhythm of War came out. We have been waiting for Stormlight Archive Book 10 since The Way of Kings came out. So, as you're reading through it, know that it's the halfway point. It's not going to be fulfilling in most ways. And that, I think, is my spoiler-free review. Look out for our spoiler review we'll be doing with the Sandbox official, and I believe Raffo, the Cosmonaut, coming later in January and February. There's a lot to go over. And also catch us each week when we put out a recap of each day where we might theorize a bit, but we will not spoil the rest of the book. Thanks for listening. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Life before death, strength before weakness, and Wind and Truth is one hell of a journey before destination.